their minds and they started packing. Left before the sun came up that day. Something, eternal summer snacking. Where were they going without ever knowing the way? Something happened and they were behind us. Always more important things to say. In terms of something else, I forgot the words. Where were they going without ever knowing the way? Here we go. This is the good part. Anyone can see the road that they walked down was paved in gold. It's always summer. They never get old. They never get hungry. They never get old and gray. You see them shadows wandering off somewhere. Walk out together, but they really don't care. Wanted the highway, they're happier there today. Today. Bow, bow, bow. The Way by Fastball. Remember that one? They had another hit that people don't remember called Out of My Mind, I believe. Out of my head, won't you out of my mind? How can I ever be so blind? That was it. Then they went away, which now I don't think happens. Nobody goes away anymore because you can always end up on Cameo. And you can always go on a humiliating reality program. All right. Hi, everybody. We're doing Chapter 3 here of The Dawn of Everything. I'll mostly just be like recapping the argument because I honestly at this point don't have a lot to respond to because I don't really know that much about this stuff. I'm not a connoisseur of early modern or of early human history. So I'll just throw some, half-baked reactions here. But at this point in the book, they're still very much invested in Grabgrow, very much invested in demolishing certain lingering cliches about early humanity. Although I have to say, some people have told me that a lot of the stuff that they're like kind of claiming to blow the lid off has not been like current thinking in any of these fields for a long time. But once again, because this is a very self-consciously political act to try to create a new narrative for a general reader. And what that means is establishing your right to speak, basically, and your legitimacy. And the way you do that is by killing the old gods. Because while current thinking on a lot of these subjects might have gone beyond a lot of these cliches that they're debunking, the frozen sort of popular understanding of these things might not have. So they're establishing credibility by killing their old god and saying whatever you half remember from school about the origins of human social structures is bullshit, and we're here to give you the real stuff. So one of the first, so they start by talking about the Ice Age. Going back to 30,000 years ago, humans, 60,000 years ago or so, when humans start to produce like a material culture that we can look at. And one of the first things that they point out that is not something we think of is that very early humans would have been much more physically diverse than humans are now, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about, that humans would have looked radically different. They say it would have been like Middle Earth. There would have been giants and dwarves. And I know enough to know that there was a hobbit race discovered in Indonesia, right, on an island. So that tracks. So we have humanity that's much more physically varied, but also fundamentally unknowable in many ways because of just how removed from our sight their lives were and how little remnants they left of their civilizations or of their existences. And then the next concept that they debunk, once again, something I have a feeling has been not current in the field in a while, is the notion of the sapient paradox, where you supposedly had human existence, like human social existence, coalescing, and then a uneven distribution of evidence of material culture, like humans taking their minds to the task of reshaping the world around them instead of just living in the world as animals with minimal like considered expression. And Grabgrow claims that this sapient paradox is actually a mirage caused by the fact that while Europe for a long time seemed to be the only place where you'd find evidence from 60,000 years, say, ago of things like, tool manipulation, and especially the creation of pigments and decorative items, that disparity actually came down to the fact that Europe has a lot more money now and has a lot more money to spend on things like archaeological excavations. And so the evidence was more plentiful there because the resources devoted to looking for the evidence was more robust. And that now, in the recent history, we've found evidence of human culture, human material culture from 60,000 years ago, all throughout the world, from Indonesia to Africa. And the point of this for Grabgrow is to say that everywhere, as soon as humans begin to live as humans with each other, they act like humans do. They consider, they express, they create. And this is part of one of the stronger assertions of the book so far, that these ancient humans were in all fundamental ways basically like us, in that they were capable of political thought and political consideration and deliberation, and that affected the choices they made and how to live. They were not being sort of herded by nature in one direction or another without the ability to intercede through collective action. The Grabgrow point out that a lot of the times books about early humans compare early tribal humanity to chimps and bonobos and other apes, and not to humans, because the buried assumption is that they were more in their social lives like apes than they were like modern humans. And Grabgrow's argument is, no, that is not the case. They were basically us at a lower level of... Jesus Christ. Terrifying. Fucking Amber Alert. There was an Amber Alert, guys. Yikes. And one of the things that undermines the traditional understanding of these things most is the fact that the hunter-gatherer bands, pre-agricultural civilization, carried out monumental architectural constructions that would have required a degree of social collaboration and cooperation that is outside of our general understanding of what a hunter-gatherer, pre-agriculture, or non-agricultural society is capable of. Like in Turkey and in Russia, you have these massive temporary structures that are put together, and they claim that they are put together around seasonal hunting festivals, that humans would spend large parts of the year as smaller bands searching for sustenance throughout a region, and then in certain periods of the year when animals like gazelles or mammoths were moving through natural choke points, they would all come together to kill as many of them as they could, and then had a extended ritualized feasting time, which also involved the creation of these giant structures. And to build that, you need social organization in a way that conventionally is understood to only be possible in a context of fixed hierarchies and generally agricultural production. And in some cases, such as the civilization that made Stonehenge, there's evidence that they had carried out agriculture for a while and then stopped, made a conscious decision to stop doing settled agriculture. Once again, evidence for fluidity and the ability of early humans to choose their own destiny and their own adventure, as it were. They also talk about how primitive culture accepted eccentricity much more readily than our civilizations do, and that eccentric figures, people who are physically and psychologically distinct from the community, were respected to some degree or another, and that this phenomenon explains why there are a number of anomalously rich grave sites from this era, where you have skeletons covered in jewels and finely crafted artworks, things that would have taken thousands of hours of labor to make and were buried with people at a time when very few people were buried at all. And this has led some people to conclude that these early civil societies had hierarchies and aristocracies, and that these graves are evidence of that. Grabgrove claim instead that since so many of these relatively few graves that have been found are peopled by children with actual like genetic abnormalities like dwarfism, that it's more likely that these were honored graves of eccentrics in some way or another. And that points to a way that a non-hierarchical, sort of egalitarian, collective social organism can be pushed in one direction or another, absent a overlord, absent a chief or a king with stable and sovereign power. Is that in times of crisis, when decisions have to be made, you can turn towards these sort of holy figures. Yeah, the Midsummer Incest Child, very good example of this. So then they talk about Claude Levi-Strauss and his work with the Napaquama society in the Amazon, which is a very interesting tribe that has seasonal changes in their structure of their society. During the wet seasons, they live together in villages, in covered buildings, and then in the dry season, they go out into small family-sized bands to find resources. And that there are chiefs, there are sort of chosen leaders who exist in both cases, but have different degrees of authority given the structure. During the summer, when they're leading hunting bands, they have actual authority over their fellows, but in the villages, that authority disintegrates, which is also something that happens with certain Inuit tribes, where during hunting expeditions, you have a rigid patriarchy, and then in the winter, when everyone is holed up in the big meeting houses eating all the blubber, it's basically a giant poly orgy with no hierarchy or rules at all. And that the Cheyenne and Lakota, after they had adapted nomadic horse-based lifestyle after the introduction of Spanish horses into America, had a similar situation where they would spend time hunting as bands that had no real connection to one another at that moment, and then coming together for massive feasts, rituals, and that during these periods, not only did you have authority in the form of chiefs, you had authority vested into essentially a police force that was there to police behavior during these mass gatherings. Well, like basically your music festival security. The guys in the yellow windbreakers. And then all of these structures had about them the commonality that the traditions embedded within them seemingly designed to prevent the accumulation of power and the abuse of power by any clique or individual. According to Grabgrau, one of the chief critiques of this notion that there is a self-conscious rejection of hierarchy in these societies is, well, how would they know what to reject if they never lived under it? And for them, seasonality and this seasonal change necessitated by the conditions of sustenance is what explains that, at least in part, because while they're hunting, while they're seeking sustenance during lean times, they do experience authority, and the authority that at that moment is necessary to successfully procure sustenance. But that when they come together, and that need is gone, and there is a degree of plenty because all of the product of the hunt has been brought in, all the surplus can be enjoyed. In that case, they don't want to feel the abrogation of rights and or not rights, but they don't want to feel that boot on their neck that they feel when they're out hunting. So that's the idea there. What happened to the other page? I had another page here. Oh crap! I had another page of notes. Oh well, I'll have to keep going. All right, I'll have to just look through what the rest of this is. Or is that everything? Oh yeah, that is everything. No, that's not it. Oh yeah, here it is. So the main point of this chapter is to make the case that there was no transition from hunter-gathering to agriculture, whereby people shifted from one to the other, that both systems existed simultaneously, that all systems were accessible to early humans in the state of superabundance, I guess you'd call it, when you consider how few humans there were versus how much resources there are on the planet Earth for humans to access. Now, there might be areas where you lose the ability to sustain yourself, but you could move. Nobody is holding anything down. And so you had systems like you had these mixed systems where people would go out and gather, do what they had to do to survive in that condition, and then come together and consume. And in that, and that their political order varied depending on the demands of the the conditions they were dealing with. And so, if that's not the case, that there's this rigid structuring from one to the other, that there's this stagism, then the question is not how did inequality emerge out of something like agriculture being adopted, but rather why did we get stuck in one? Why did we get frozen into one arrangement that was hierarchical and that did demand the assumption of authority through orders of power? When did we stop moving and shifting? And I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm assuming we will soon. I know from reading about the book that one of their big arguments is that agriculture, the adoption of agriculture, did not necessitate hierarchy. That there was significant agricultural societies that were able to organize horizontally around agriculture. And I don't know, we haven't gotten to that point yet. But their big argument is that it was not that, it was something else. Basically, that it is not determined by material conditions. That's their big overarching thesis here. And we'll see. As I said, I don't know. We haven't really gotten yet to that. We're still in the background breaking down some of these assumptions and rebuilding them with new ones. And I have to say, as I said, I don't really know that much about this area, but it certainly seems plausible, you know? I certainly accept the premise that early humans were capable of making considered political decisions. I don't see any reason why not. If they are capable of communicating with each other, then they're capable of making collective decisions. I think that's axiomatic. So next week we'll read the 4th chapter. Let me see how long it is. This one actually ended up not being very long and not having that much to talk about, so I might do 2 chapters next time. I think I'll just do chapter 4 next time. Yeah, it's like 50 pages. So, I mean, it makes me think like, okay, well, what did stick us, if that's what happened? What did make us stick with hierarchies? I mean, the first thing that just comes to mind is written language, and obviously that's a chicken and egg situation. But I can see a situation where writing emerges out of a practical need created by a specific situation, and then once imposed, has effect of freezing social structures, and I think very importantly, dividing social organisms between the literate and the non-literate. But I don't know, because once again, the argument here is that it gets fixed. So it's not a question of when a hierarchy emerges, really. It's when the alternative to hierarchy disappears amongst the people in a given area. But yeah, like the Incans were hierarchical as shit, and they didn't have written language. So but I do really believe that at a certain point, a economy based on surplus extraction will destroy any vestiges of egalitarian social relations, because the reality of one group of people repeatedly and systemically consuming the surplus produced by another shatters social bonds, at least the kind that are necessary to allow for horizontalism. At a certain point, people are no longer living in the world, in a natural world, or even a collectively agreed upon version of the world. They are living in a version of the world crafted by a faction, by an elite tier, who then project it onto everyone, who absorb it in one way or another. They might be alienated from it, they might be unhappy within it, but their understanding of the world is still restrained by it. And technology has the effect of, over time, reifying and extending the power of that realm, that fantasy world, to recreate the earth in its image, and to spread the vocabulary of that reality much more deeply. And that's why I think that at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that they're saying about in this book about how things were possible, how the liquidity of human possibilities in prehistory is not actually very relevant to the current moment, because I think in very real respect we are different. We're a different species. Like he's saying that early humans were capable of political thought and deliberation. I believe that to be true. But what that means then versus now, I think is fundamentally distinct. And I think it comes down to human civilization or human culture, whatever you want to call it, from bands to advanced societies, wherever it is, whatever humans coming together to live, is a dialogue, right? And in this chapter, Grab Grow talk about how real human thought is really only capable in conversation. Real human reflection is only truly capable in dialogue. By an individual mind can't really do that. That's a fantasy of the modernity and of the isolated human consciousness. That's not the reality. The reality is that real deliberation and real reflection are only capable through dialogue. But it's not a dialogue just between humans. It's a dialogue, I guess you'd call it a trialogue, between humans and the natural world that they inhabit, which cannot speak in the same language as humans, but that does have an ability to communicate that can be deciphered by humans. Now, what they're going to determine what the nature's telling them might very well not be accurate, because they don't know. But if enough people come together to figure out what nature is saying and act accordingly, they will, if they're wrong, they will get owned. If they're right, they will prosper. And if they prosper, they will continue to accept what nature is telling them, basically. And then technology emerges as a way to, the first technology really being language. The first technology of civilization being language, the ability to communicate and therefore coordinate. And then subsequent technology is an elaboration of that process of having human interaction that can move towards group prosperity. An idea that there is my interests, that there is an I, that there is a you, that there is an us, and that they have interests that can be aligned. And then technology can help move those interests in one direction. But those tools, the technological tools, are not equally accessible to everyone. And it's that asymmetry that over time accumulates poles of oppression and of domination. And those poles pull us away from that dialogue that humans were having and replaces it with technological compulsion, and at the same time pulls us away from the natural partner in the dialogue. And humans in this point in history have been so thoroughly alienated from the feedback loop with the natural world, and so dependent on technology to make up for that alienation, just as it makes up for our alienation from each other. That the spontaneous power to just live differently that grab grow are basically arguing is always present in humanity cannot be effectively pursued, because the necessary relationships between people and between the environment have been severed. Our attempts to find new ways to live are always going to butt against these rigid technologies that at any given moment hold sway over the vast majority of humanity, like property. Like these societies that Grabgrow talk about have in common, one, no language, no written language, and two, no property. And those are, I think, related. That means the ability, just the sheer ability to enforce hierarchy is seriously limited. Because how are you going to make somebody do something for you if they don't want to? Who are you going to... They can just leave. And that is not a thing that current humans can do to enforce egalitarianism and horizontalism. But we'll see where the rest of the argument goes. Because unlike in prehistory, any attempt to organize small-scale alternatives to systems of control and domination and hierarchy and conveyor belts of resource extraction depend on those networks. They cannot opt out of them. And that people who make them up are still riven with those same imposed identities that living in these structures has created for them. I mean, the Chaz certainly, I think, is a sobering example. I mean, you couldn't even write it, right? Like, if you think about this, you couldn't even write this. I mean, that's really, I think if you want to understand, like, what hyperrealism or late capitalism, any of these buzzwords mean, like, as terms of living them, it is that, and this, for younger people, doesn't make sense because they've never lived any other way. But for somebody who's a little older, who experienced the end of history in the 90s, when we all kind of knew what was coming, we could sense it, but we couldn't articulate it other than in, satire and in dystopia that we imagined. All that's here now, and as a result, the tropes of like ironic reversal that made up our earlier generation of artistic responses to the anxieties of modernity are just reality. It's just what happens. like Donald Trump being president. And take the situation in Chaz where you had this massive uprising against unaccountable police violence, right? Disproportionately applied to black people, right? Leads to this area in the center of Seattle where the police tactically retreat and allow a self-organized little quasi-political commune to evolve. And people show up and they want to do land acknowledgments and they want to bring in animals to try to start farming. And of course, a bunch of people show up, people who are maybe strangers, people who people don't know, and a police force self-appoints with guns. Many of them, I guess, a few of them anyway, were veterans. And in the course of their duty of non-hierarchical anarchist police force, they shoot and kill a young black guy, a young black kid. And then after it happens, make a public statement saying that they're doing an internal investigation, which is exactly what police forces say after they do a shooting of a young black kid. I mean, wait a minute. LOA land acknowledging and still not returning it? Returning it to who? I gotta say, the idea of land back to me doesn't make any sense. Because the natives who still exist in this country are Americans. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, they are American capitalist subjects. Putting them in charge of land does not change the character of the system that we operate here. It only changes the names on the deeds. And the idea that you're going to have a very small group of people, even if you say, okay, not just any natives, but the specific ones who have good politics and want to decommodify land. Who's going to accede to that? Mass movement and mass politics are the only thing that's going to transform social relations in this country. Because we are all, all of us are wildly alienated from each other and from our environment. And I do think that the task of socialism is to mend those fractures and to mend that alienation. But that the only way that that happens is by taking the technological connections that exist between people, the technological capabilities of land and resource management that exist, and democratizing them, which is a political project. And it is a material project. And it can only be carried out by, by the cultivation and advancement of class consciousness. People acting in coordination along an axis of material interest. Because that is the only thing that can truly discipline people towards a goal. All other interests, the interest of the abstract ideas of being free or something, can be manipulated in the mind into meaning anything. It is in every moment. The capitalist bonanza allows you any number of ways to feel like you're expressing your individuality and your politics and your supposed desires. But material interests, hunger, security, they can't be fudged. They can't be compromised in the same way. If you're on the shit end of the stick, if you are seeing yourself declining, principles can mean anything. And something like Chaz is a good example of that. A bunch of people come together to create this alternative model. And what does that mean? It means whatever anybody already wanted it to mean. I know there was a guy there who was like a fucking SoundCloud rapper or something, who was like getting his mixtape out or something. And that was what that meant. If you horizontally organize alienated capitalist subjects, they will recreate structures of capitalism absent a material project to literally discipline them, but not externally. It is an internal discipline. If my kid's going to have a better life than I do, if I am going to be able to sustain myself in even the medium term, I have to do this. And you have enough people who come to the same conclusion about what that is, then the discipline is internal. And then structures of hierarchy that emerge out of the necessity of organizing the people into effective action. Any other thing that you're trying to do just means what you want it to mean. Just like morality has meant in the West since Protestantism. What God wants, what liberty is, whatever abstract notion of the good you're pushing for, is what you already wanted anyway. And what you wanted is, of course, not your want. Your desires are not your own. Our desires are imposed on us from the culture we're enmeshed in. So any project that is not grounded in material advancement for the working class becomes individual self-expression, which is the indulgence of the ego. You might not think of it that way, and you might not consciously be moving in that direction. But once you get into conflict with other people, this is the important part, because that horizontalism, that is not without conflict. Of course it is. People have different ideas, even if they're all 100% earnest, and they think they've cleansed themselves of their bourgeois taint. Their understanding of the world and what to do in it is going to be different, and they have to figure out how to move forward. In the conflict, the only thing that emerges is the most base and selfish, is the rule of the person who is willing to manipulate the system towards their ends. You either get a charismatic cult leader, or you get you get rule by the most annoying, basically. The people who are most willing to badger and refuse to compromise. And again, absent a material goal, there's no way to know if if the goals of that group are compatible with effective action. But we'll see. We'll see with more. Next week we'll read chapter 4. That's my big sticking point, is that if you're not listening to like the rumble of your stomach, if you're not having your needs, your politics sharpened by real consequences, it ends up just being a game played with the tools available to a capitalist economy. And it will be accommodated to the extent that it's compatible with the continuation of that system. Somebody says that the Soviets wanted to do public transportation, but everybody wanted a car, and that they assumed we'd make a better people with a better society, and we were wrong. Well, the thing is, the Soviet Union, as I've said several times, was in a broad sense, certainly after 1921, a mistake. Now, that doesn't mean that when the people in it should have given up. I think Bukharin was basically right. But because of the Soviet Union's need to compete with global capitalism on its own terms, it was never able to transcend labor alienation. Workers still, I mean, you could talk about the degrees of self-management that existed in Soviet manufacturing, but they still were factory workers mainly the same way that American factory workers were. Their lives were broadly similar. And so it makes perfect sense that they want broadly similar things. A bigger refrigerator, a bigger car, absent the ability to truly dictate the terms of their own laboring lives. Well, they say somebody said Deng did this. Well, right, but Deng is operating in the wake of the Soviet Union and the creation of the Soviet Union. I mean, in China, they're basically, and this is honestly long-term unsustainable. I mean, China has stepped back to capitalism, state-sponsored capitalism, but has still predicated on giving people the same promise of material consumption that America did, which just cannot happen given the current ecological constraints. You can't have a billion Chinese people living like Americans. And that's all that there is, absent a project. That's the thing. Once you go from a revolutionary project to a settled state system, alienation is going to compound and spread and have to be filled in with promise of material solace. And there is a contradiction between a working class movement that is predicated on advancing material interests and the necessity that a socialist government would have to, as part of its creation, reorient people's understanding of what their material interests are. And that's where the revolutionary project comes in. And that's honestly what that is the germ of Trotsky's deepest insight, I think, is the knowledge that if you just have another state with central planning instead of a market, you still have the same fundamental social alienation at play as you do under capitalism. And that it is the revolutionary project that changes people's relationship to each other and the world around them in a way that redefines for themselves what material interest means. And of course, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be alienation in a literally progressive, forward-moving socialist state project, but that alienation would be channeled rather than as it is under stable state structures that we live under, where it accumulates and it can only be subsumed, can only be denied by the creation of structures that only compound the alienation in the first place. People are doing crimes. Well, get more cops, throw them in prison. That creates its own problems that then require their own solutions. People are pissed off. Give them cars. Give them suburban homes. Well, that creates their own crisis, and it's spiraling crisis. And the state can then only ever be caught in a cycle of adding contradictions on top of contradictions rather than fundamentally facing the contradictions, as opposed to a revolutionary communist or socialist state where alienation is structured towards the fundamental act of combating bourgeois social order, which doesn't just go away. That has to be in every detail isolated and reduced. Okay, so next week we're going to do chapter 4, see what happens, and talk some more then. Bye-bye.